and gentlemen, girls and boys, and
there.
assemble. Who's speaking? Right. Ladies and gentlemen.
This could be nice.
Hold on. Keith, everyone else mute apart from Mike. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. It is the every other Sunday of every other Sunday. Therefore, it is our worldwide story round. It is ably hosted by Mike Russ, sitting somewhere around Much Wenlock or some similar establishment. So I'm going to abandon you. But before I do that, I'm going to announce what's coming up, because I normally do that at the end. Next Friday is Norman Perrin from Canada. Then Wednesday, the 3rd of April, there will be at 7 o'clock. There will be Justine Demere's Tales and Tunes, which you are all welcome to come and join in and tell a story on.
So, John, what was the date for that?
April the 3rd.
April the 3rd.
Okay. That'll be a Wednesday.
Yeah, okay. I'm coming to that. I'm going to bring my nickel harp and tell a story. So.
Okay, that'll be fantastic. So, and then in a couple of weeks' time, in not next Sunday, but the Sunday after, will be Mike Russ. Now, what's happening on the... I've only got next Friday in my head, but everything's online, Karen. Everything is online.
Okay.
So I'm going to hand over to Mike and get back on the dual carriageway. Fairly well, everybody.
Well, safe home, John, and you take care.
Safe travel, John.
Okay.
Bye.
Right.
Okay.
Safe journey, John.
Yeah, safe journey, John. Welcome to everybody. From tonight, we have people from the States. Well, Donald's not from the States, he's in the States. Someone from Greece, someone from South Africa, and someone from Manchester. Are you in Manchester, Italy, Mona?
Manchester at the moment, yeah.
Manchester, yeah. I should have known. Is it raining?
Yes.
Yes. Right. Right, so it's lovely to see you all again, and thank you for coming. So we'll take it from there. So the next club, if you happen to be in Shropshire, will be the 8th of April. And that's the storytelling club that we run here. But it's not a storytelling club, it's a poetry, it's a spoken word club. I know Keith's been there, I hope Karen's going to get here. And I know that it's in the Pottery Despina where you have been. And Mona, you'd be very welcome to come down sometime. It's about 2 hours from Manchester, if you wanted to hop on a train. And Donald, with all your jet hanging all over the world, are you working in America or are you just on holiday over there? Are you doing some storytelling over there?
No, I'm just on holiday. I tried to find something, but nothing fitted in with our travel plans because we're touring California.
Oh, okay. You're going up to see. You're going up to see the big redwood trees.
I've been to Sequoia National Park before. We're going to Yosemite this time.
Right. Well, you don't have to go all the way over there. We've got one in. Well, we've got two in Much Wenlock. You're going to come to Much Wenlock instead. Right. So we all know the format. We all know how it works. So I'm going to go to the Wolverhampton Keith. And so we're not getting mixed up with the Lincolnshire Keith. And so we'll take it from there. I'm going to sit here until everybody's done what they want to do. We've got plenty of time. I have a glass of beer tonight. I don't often do it. Tonight, I went swimming this morning in a reservoir just to waken me up first thing. Up in the hills in Shropshire here, there's an outside. It's called Carley Mill Valley, and there's a reservoir outside, and the water's warming up a bit. So I thought I'd go for a dip. So I've done all my activity. So I'm just going to sit here and listen to you all now. Okay, so we're going to go to Keith first, and then Keith second. Okay, so Keith from Wolverhampton first. Hey.
I just like being the other Keith. You know, it's a sort of
Oh, you're frozen.
hierarchy of Keiths in this group, and I'm the other Keith, so I understand that.
No, well,
Anyway,
I hate
Anyway,
Keith, I hate the
I want
word
to take you
just.
back to
Okay, keep
now.
going.
What, pardon?
I hate the word just. I hate anybody saying I'm just a housewife, I'm just this, I'm just that.
Well,
hate
you aren't a
the word
housewife,
just.
so no.
No, you can't say I'm just the other Keith. I don't like the word just. Okay. It's if it's English isn't your
Okay,
first
I am the
language,
alternative Keith for
yes,
my
better.
pedantic friend in Shropshire who doesn't like the word just. I am
That's
the
right.
alternative Keith. Is that enough?
That's better. Yeah.
You don't get heckled very often as a storyteller, do you? But it happens sometimes. Here we
Well,
go.
you
Here we
tend to
go.
be, you tend to if I'm about.
See, I'm not the host, so I can't mute him, but anyway, I'd like to take you back to Tudor times. And imagine, if you will, a tiny white cottage on the edge of a wood with a piece of land probably half the size of a football pitch. And in the cottage lives a farmer and his wife. And they eke out a living, and they really eke out a living. But he is a very devout man, and he goes to church 3 or 4 times a week, twice on Sunday, and he hangs on every word the priest says. For he is sure, by attending church and praying diligently, that he will change his luck. And he does. For one day, he is out in the woods hunting, and he catches 2 partridges, not 1, but 2 partridges. And he marches home in triumph, and he says to his wife, I want you to cook these 2 partridges, for I wish to share them with the most important person in my world. Now, you might think that's his wife, but it's not, it's the priest. And so he sets off to invite the priest to dinner. And the wife plucks and strips the partridges and puts them on the spit over a big cauldron, a great old hob, if you could imagine that, one of those cast iron things. And in the hob, she puts vegetables, sweet potatoes, parsnips, carrots, and herbs that she grows in the garden, which smell lovely. So the partridges are on the hob, turning on the spit, turning, and the fumes from the hob are rising up around them. So it's like a double cooking experience. And she is smelling it. Now, when I say that they eke out a living, having meat to cook is a rare event. They spend most of their time eating vegetables, turnips, parsnips, things they grow themselves, which are adequate to keep them going, but not the same as 2 partridges. And as she turns them on the spit and they start to brown, and she smells the steam coming off the cauldron, she is tempted, and she remembers her husband's last words when he points his finger at her and says, Wife, you will not touch those partridges. They are for me and the priest. Well, she can't stop herself now. And she reaches forward and she takes a small piece of the browning skin of the partridge. Oh, it tastes lovely. It tastes lovely. The herbs and the steam and the partridge itself on the spit. She takes another piece and another piece, and before she knows what she's done, she's eaten one of the partridges. What have I done? She wipes her hands on her pinny and thinks, oh, what have I done? And what shall I do when my husband comes back, when there's only 1 partridge? I know she thinks to herself. The big old tomcat sitting in the corner will eat anything, and she has to hide all her food from him, even though he's out ratting and catching mice and has a full belly all the time. She knows that that could be the culprit. So then she thinks to herself, well, if the cat has eaten the partridge, I might as well eat the other one. For the cat wouldn't have left one partridge, would he? He'd have eaten them both as my back was turned. So she eats the other partridge with the juice running down onto her pinny. But when she's finished, she has a pang of guilt, thinking, if my husband comes home and finds the old Tom has eaten the partridges, he will surely kill the sad beast. Then I'd have to catch the rats and the mice and add to my work, which is already overflowing. And as she's thinking this, her husband arrives home. Broad grin. The priest has accepted the invitation to dinner. So she points to the back door and she says to the husband, go sharp the knife. Go sharp the knife to carve the partridges, because you need your sharpest knife, and he sees the sense in that. He takes the whetstone, he takes the knife, and he goes out the back door, and you can hear him going sharpening in the knife. She's bought herself a bit of time to explain where these partridges have gone. And while she's thinking and stirring the pot, the priest arrives in his vestments and marches in, and seeing the husband outside the back door sharpening a knife, he comes up behind the wife and puts his arms lasciviously around her waist. He thinks this is part of priests' privileges in a village. But she is having none of it. And she gives him a sharp elbow into his stomach. And this priest jumps backwards in alarm, clutching his stomach and crying out. And as he does so, she shouts at him and says, you have been found out, she says. My husband, a devout man, has found out about your shenanigans in the village, and he is appalled. And outside, he's sharpening his knife. He plans to trap you here and castrate you. The colour drains from the priest's face, and he turns toward the door and begins to go. Just as he begins to go out of the door, the farmer comes through the other door with a knife in his hand, and the wife says, husband, husband, the priest has made off with the partridges. The husband runs after him, and there he is going out of the gate, and he shouts out loudly, stop there, priest, for I will have them both, and he's waving his knife. The priest turns into a sprinter and runs down the street, jumps over the wall of the manse, runs in and bars the door. And it is said that that was the last invitation to dinner that the priest accepted in that village. Thank you. And thank you, Dave
Keith.
Tom. That's from his book.
I was going to say, if the Tudor ones, if it didn't come from Dave Tong, you have to go and tell him, because he really has collected an awful lot of those Tudor
Oh,
stories.
brilliant. He's got a brilliant collection.
He is. And what's more, as a by the by, Dave is one of the nicest blokes I know. He's a really nice chap as well. Really.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right, so we're going to go from Keith to Lincolnshire.
Well, hello, everybody. Now, I told this story at Rona's Ceilidh last Thursday, and so and it's appropriate this time of year. So those that you've heard it before, I hope you will enjoy it for a second time. Now, On Wednesday, the 20th, it was the World Storytelling Day. And it's a great day. I was able to take part in the Storytellers of Ireland for that. Well, take part and listen to all the stuff that was, all the stories that the Storytellers of Ireland were doing. But it's the same day as the feast of St. Cuthbert. And so I'm going to tell you the story about St. Cuthbert and the eagle. Now, it was 650 AD, and Cuthbert set out from on his journey down the valley side. Set out from Melrose, walking along the valley in a beautiful day with a young man who was a novice. And as they walked along, Cuthbert was able to recite lots and lots of the Psalms. There's 150 Psalms, and he knew them off by heart. And he would recite a part of a psalm, and then he would turn to the novice and say, well, what's the next verses? Well, sometimes the novice had got them, but sometimes he hadn't. So St. Cuthbert, he told them what the verses were. And so as they walked along, this young man was able to learn the Psalms from Cuthbert. Now, Cuthbert also, he appreciated nature and all the things that were around, all the trees and the grass and the plants and the flowers and the birds and the animals. And he was very knowledgeable in all of those parts of God's creation. And so he was teaching the young man all about nature as well as they walked along. Now, it was the custom in those days that when a traveller passed by the cottage of a family, no matter how poor they were, the family would always share something with the travellers. And this particularly was the case if a holy man was on his travels walking by the cottage. But there was no cottage in sight at this time, and it's a time of year when there was not much around. It's just a beautiful day, but a lovely long walk beside the valley. And Cuthbert said to the novice that, where can we find food in the wilderness? Where can we find food today? Because they had taken no provisions. And so they were both getting very hungry. And at that time of year, there was no nuts, no berries to be had. Well, the young man, he just didn't know what to say, because there's no food in the wilderness as far as he could say. Well, Cuthbert, he stood straight up, and he looked up into the sky, and he put his arms out, each side of him, to form a cross. And the young man looked down, and in the shadow, he was getting towards the end there, in the shadow, he could see a cross in the shadow formed by Cuthbert's body with his arms outstretched. But also, just to one side, there was another shadow, a shadow of a smaller cross. And the young man, he looked up in the sky, and there he saw an eagle. And the eagle was flying around on the thermals, and he came down and it plunged into the river. And it emerged a little while after with a salmon in its beak and landed on the bank. Ah! The young man was so pleased that just loved salmon, and he rushed over and picked up the salmon that was just at the side of the eagle. And Cuthbert said, do not steal from the fisherman. Cut it in half and give half back to the eagle, and we'll have the other half for our supper. Well, very reluctantly, the young man, he drew out his knife and he cut the salmon in two, and he placed the half salmon in front of the eagle. And the eagle stood there on the bank, and it cocked his head, and I think the young man always thought he was winking. And he took the other half and he brought it back to Cuthbert, and they journeyed on until they came to a cottage, the cottage of a very poor family. And so that evening they was able to share that salmon with the family. It was broiled salmon, and they had a wonderful meal. Now, Cuthbert, he took out from his leather satchel a small book. It was a Gospel of St. John, covered by red leather. And he opened up the book, and he started to reading about Jesus, how he fed the 5,000. But the young man noticed that although he is apparently reading, he was actually reciting that story from the New Testament by heart. And so that evening, the family and the young man were fed not just with their bodies, but also with their spirits, because of Cuthbert sharing the message from John's Gospel. Now, Cuthbert, he knelt down and he drew in the dust the shape of a cross. And in early Christian days, there was a secret symbol of a fish that was symbolized Christianity. And this was drawn in the dust by Cuthbert. The sign of the fish. And the Greek word for fish is ichthus. And each of the letters of that word for fish stands for part of what Christians stand for. Jesus, Christos, Theos, Weos, Zoter. Jesus Christ, God, Son, Saviour. And also the symbol of the eagle became a symbol for the Gospel of St. John. For out of the Gospel of St. John, there's the message of how Jesus died for us on the cross to save us from our sins. Now that is a true story that was recorded by the Venerable Bede of Jarrow, the story of St. Cuthbert and the eagle.
Thank you, John. Right, I've got a Cuthbert story. I think I might just tell it a bit later. Yes, another true one. He was an amazing chap, that guy. In the 650s, between 630s and 670s,
That's
I
right,
think, something along those lines.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, something along those lines. Yeah,
Yeah.
brilliant. Okay. So I'm going to go all the way to Greece now, where the other thing I do have to say while I'm here is that our clocks change next Sunday. Whose clocks? Everybody's clocks change. I know the Europeans, we all change at the same time. So we will be here at 6 o'clock UK time. Whatever the UK time is, it's 6 o'clock UK time. Okay, we can all get confused about this stuff. So I think this being your clocks changed, you go forward as well, do you? Yeah. Okay, so we're going to come to you next. Okay.
So for the people here, I have written in the chat, for those of you who can see it in Greek letters, of course, what Keith told us from the New Testament. The word is ichthys for fish, like the official, more antique word. And every letter, it is an acronym. They used this. So every letter has a special meaning, which would be Jesus Christ, God's Son, Savior, one by one. I could use this letter.
Okay.
So tomorrow it is the celebration of 203 years of Greece being an independent state after we were released from the Turkish occupation, which lasted for almost 4 centuries. So it is a big natural celebration, of course. We have the parade, and we place these garlands of flowers at the monuments dedicated to the heroes, and etc. And I'm a very proud mommy, of course, because my Girl Scout is taking part in the parade, etc., etc. So I thought that to honor the day, I should give you some information about my hometown today instead of a story. This is what I learned doing guided tours on my island, so I'm going to share this information with you. And I think that I might be able to share my screen with you now. Okay.
Yeah.
Let me minimize that. So, okay, I'm in Google Earth. So Donald is somewhere here overseas across the Atlantic. I'll skip Donald, move to the UK, and my friends here who are closer. And if we travel through Europe all the way down to the south, here you can see Greece. Okay, the letters are in Greek. This is Athens, where not all Greeks live, Mike, apparently. But very close to it, we have the Cyclades or Kyklades. So these are 24 islands, and in the middle of them all is my island Syros here, this little spot here. Yeah. Okay, so this, its capital is called Hermopolis, and the capital of the island is also the capital of all the Cycladic islands. So everything that happens around here, most of the public services are here. If somebody gets caught here in Mykonos, you know, you must have heard of Mykonos in summer selling drugs or something, they are brought to my island to pass through court, to be judged, or, you know, whatever happens around the Cyclades will be brought here for justice. So let me see, where did I put us? Where are we? Okay. Okay. No, this one. Sorry. I have to stop sharing now. Have I stopped sharing? No. Okay, found it. Okay, cool. So now you have a more or less an idea of where we are geographically. So Syros has been inhabited for millennia. There is a reference made in Homer in the Odyssey, where supposedly the shepherd, the pig shepherd that served Odysseus' father, was a slave caught from the island of Syros and brought there to Ithaca to serve the family of the king. And that is the first person who receives Odysseus back to Ithaca when he finally manages to return there 10 years later after the Trojan War. So we have reference, somewhat historical, let us say, that people were on the island, living on the island since back then. But then, of course, after the Byzantium fall, things changed drastically. As you know, when the Crusades started, people left in big groups from several countries across Europe to go to the Holy Land and retrieve the holy places, supposedly. But, you know, there were a lot of people armed with boats, and not all of them were nice people. Not all of them were dedicated to the cause. So upon return, those who had not plundered enough and did not come back with enough riches turned to piracy. So the Aegean Sea was plagued by pirates back then. And Syros, my island, it is just a little rock in the middle of the Aegean Sea. There's not much water, few springs of natural water here and there. Wherever there was a spring, there was a settlement, of course. But because of the lack of water, there is not much vegetation. Because of the lack of vegetation, there's not much livestock. So it wasn't a very rich place, you can understand. And then the next logical question is, what did pirates want? Well, the reason that pirates visited this island and many around it was slaves. They would come here and they would steal people and they would sell them away as slaves. So what happened was that the place where Hermopolis is now, the natural port of the island, was abandoned, and the people retreated back on a very steep hill, which was turned into this kind of fortress. There was a wall outside, they got locked inside, so they had 7 gates that they would lock every time they would see from up there that pirates were approaching the port, and they would try to find refuge inside. And even if some pirates managed to penetrate through that wall and enter the settlement, the wall, it is a very steep hill, as I said earlier, so one house's roof is the next house's balcony. It's that steep. And all of it was created in a very chaotic style, little alleys, steps, and you cannot even go there by motorbike. You can only enter either on foot or by mule. So even if the pirates managed to enter that settlement, this was so weirdly structured that they would get lost. And by getting lost in there, in the little alleys, people would have the chance to go underneath what later became a monastery in the catacomb and hide them and their animals until they were safe again. So, because of the piracy, the port of Syros was abandoned. Now, as we said earlier, since the fall of Constantinople, Greece was under Turkish occupation. The Ottoman Empire was spreading, and it was trying to spread some tentacles towards Europe using Greece as part of the larger plan of the scheme. So missionaries came to the Cycladic Islands, who originated from Venice and Italy and France, and they tried to turn people into Catholicism. Now, because of piracy and because of the Turkish occupation, almost the entire population of my island back then turned to Catholicism. All of them that resided on Anno Syros, which means Upper Syros, and around the villages of the island turned to Catholicism so that they would have the Pope's protection. And even though they did have to pay some tax to the Sultan, to the Turkish king, the Turks never came here. They never inhabited the island because it was a poor place. They had no interest. It was not profitable. So they did pay a tax to the Turks, but they also had the protection of the Pope. There had been several attempts to free the country from the Turks earlier, but none of them had been successful until 1821. And that one was the first successful one because we had help from European allies, and we managed to, I'm speaking in a plural as if I was there. I'm just talking about my country. This is why. People then managed to free part of the country. They managed to free the capital, Athens, and a part around it, Attica, and a part of the Peloponnese. And that was about it. Nothing to do with the size of the country today. But little by little, as time passed and the revolution progressed, and it seemed that the country would be back to its normal state, a free Greek country, more people from several different parts of Greece decided to enter the cause, to fight. One of those places was a big island very close to the Middle East coast, very close to Turkey, called Chios. Now, Chios, nothing to do with Syros. I don't know how many times the size it is. It was quite the contrary. That was a very, very profitable island. They had been given several privileges by the Sultan, and most people there were affluent. They were ship owners and captains. So when Chios decided to fight alongside the rest of the Greeks and take part in the Greek Revolution, become part of Free Greece, that was like the ultimate treason to the Sultan's eyes. So troops were sent there, Turkish troops, and the orders were not to spare anyone's life. So there was this great big massacre we still talk about today. Those who had the means and managed to take their families and their fortunes escaped from the island of Syros. But they were persecuted, of course, they were pursued, and Syros, being under the Pope's protection, was a safe harbor for them. So people from Chios and Psara and those islands afflicted came to Syros. Then we had the people, the Catholics living on Ano-Syros in the upper hill, and down Dale at the natural port where Hermopolis now stands, it was nothing. It was left just there, abandoned. So those people who came here with their families and their fortunes, they decided that this would be a pretty good place for them to start all over again, start building their lives from scratch. So they decided that they would build this town. And as they were rich people and they had come here with means, they started building infrastructure and industries and shipyards. And it got so big, it was the biggest port all over what was then Free Greece. So it started getting better and better, the situation. More people joined the fight from across the country, from different parts. More and more pieces of land turned free. And the people who founded the town gathered in order to decide what could be the new town's name. And several suggestions came forward, but what won the competition was the town of Hermes, the god of the merchants. So most of them were merchants. They would rely on commerce to do their business. So they wanted to keep this sense of coming from ancient Greece to modern Greece. So keep it in a row historically. And Hermes being the god of merchants and liars and thieves, I think you see where this is going, not politicians back then, but it would be today, became the patron of the new founded town. As more and more parts of Greece became free, and what is now Greece came to be more or less, the industries moved to Piraeus, which is the greatest port next to the capital. And little by little, Syros lost its charm. But what is special about this island, what makes it different from other more traditional Cycladic islands, is that the people who created the buildings back then wanted to give the town a sense of the European towns and cities they would visit with their boats, and they were influenced by all the European splendor. So this is a little, in a small scale, a neoclassical town with beautiful buildings from the 19th century, some of which are still, luckily, have been refurbished, renovated today. And if I have the chance to guide people around my town, I take them to buildings where they can see all the, what do you call them? I'm sure there must be a name. There are paintings of the ceiling. And some of them even have these fragments of real gold leaves that were put there, around it in very rich houses. So, okay, this is a little bit about my island, and to extend it to where I'm getting at, this is a big welcome for any storyteller who would like to visit. I'm here, and it is a very nice place to see. So there you have it.
Oh, Despina, you paint a lovely picture of a lovely place. And I think you mean frescoes. Do you mean frescoes?
Frescoes, there you are. Thank you, Mike. Yeah, that was the word.
And I'd love to visit. I've never visited Greece. I've never been there before. And I'm sure one day I'll probably manage to get there one way or another. So maybe, and I think we all feel the same. I bet some of you, Keith, the two Keiths, either of you, has anybody here been to Greece at all? Yeah, there's one or two people who have. Yeah.
Rona
Okay.
and Keith have been there here.
So what you
before,
need
but
to do-
not in Hermopolis, not yet.
What you need to do in your spare time is just start a festival. You only have to sort of do 8 hours a day for 52 weeks of the year to organise a festival. Don't worry about it. I'm sure you can fit it in.
I'll keep that in
Right.
mind, Mike.
That's lovely. And just as a by the by, because your English is so good, it really is. You are absolutely fluent in the language. But
Thank you.
that connotation when you say we would mean we as a citizen of the country more than we as the person.
Yeah.
It's just a nuance of the language. Okay, that's all. Right. So I've got Donald from Scotland, who's, I'll say it again because the word envy comes to mind, I think, sometimes. He sat in California in Los Angeles drinking English beer, I think, at the time. But it's hard work, but someone's got to do it,
Well, it's a bit early. It's only 11:45 in the morning here.
Oh, okay.
11:46. So it's a bit early. And I'm going. I might leave this meeting early because we're going to the ice hockey later on today.
Oh, okay.
So anyway, this is I started off writing a story and it ended up a poem. And it's about my uncle, and he worked in the docks in Glasgow, and he would bring home some really strange things. And this is the story. My uncle has a shrunken head in a box below his bed. He keeps it as a souvenir of when he was an engineer upon the railways far away, from Chittagong to Mandalay. The story goes, or so I'm told, that when he was young, brave and bold, while speeding down the track one day, he spotted something in the way. He slammed the brakes on, ladies screamed. Sparks flew up through clouds of steam. Men said, "By Gad!" and children wailed. The wheels glowed hot upon the rails. The funnel poured out thick black smog. He saw it was a pile of logs placed neatly there to stop the train by bandits bad and quite insane. And when the train was standing still, the bandits poured down from the hill, screaming, cursing, waving guns. My uncle then began to run and shouted out to lock the doors and lie down flat upon the floor. The bandits, now beside the track, suddenly stopped, quite taken aback, for my uncle stood with upheld hands and set a challenge to the band. "I'll fight your biggest man," he said, "a fight till one of us is dead. Should your man win, you kill us all, but I take the train should your man fall." The bandit chief thought for a while, then his ugly face cracked to a smile. "I have the very man for you. I'll stand back and let him through." The band of brigands broke their ranks, and at the back a human tank stood 8 feet tall and just as wide. A scimitar hung by his side. A lot of brawn, but not much brain. A ruthless killer, all the same. And a cheer came up from the crowd when the bandit chief called out loud. Sorry, I've lost it. Oh, goodness. Banjo Breakers wrote back in, thanks. A cheer went up and the leader said, when you've been killed, I shrink your head. It will be worn in pride of place with others hung around my waist. My uncle's heart beat like a drum. Must find a weapon or I'm done. Then an overwhelming sense of doom. All he could find was a broom tied onto the guard's van door. He searched, but there was nothing more. The giant drew his sword and laughed. He looked a master of his craft. His swishing sword cut through the air with surprising style and flair. My uncle thought, I'm doomed to die. I may as well give it a try. So he swung the broom and he held it aloft, and the nail fell out and the head flew off, and it hit the giant to his surprise, right smack bang between the eyes. And to the shock of all around, the giant crashed down to the ground. One single blow upon the head had rendered this Goliath dead. A hush descended on the crowd, and then the leader called out loud, you've killed the greatest man I had. There was none so bold and none so bad. One single blow and he was down. So now you must wear his crown. You threatened me, my uncle said, that you would wear my shrunken head. I don't want to wear his crown, but I'll take his head shrunken down. The chief then shouted, cut it off and bring it shrunken in a box. And that's the story Uncle told of when he was young, brave and bold, and how the bandits left the train never to be seen again. And though he said the head was proof, my auntie once told me the truth. He never fought the giant thief. He's been no further east than Leith. He found the head, my auntie says, down behind a seat one day. Though he was a sort of railway man, a conductor on a Glasgow tram. Thank you.
I tell you what, Donald, you're such a talented person. That's lovely. I just couldn't do what you've just done there. I really.
Yeah, if only I could remember this.
Well,
about 25 years ago, and I get it wrong every time.
Not only couldn't I read it, I couldn't remember it anyway. So that's lovely. And thanks for stopping in your holiday to be here. So how long are you over there for?
Until the 11th of April.
Oh, okay. So you'll be back.
We're flying up to San Francisco. We're going to San Francisco. Then we're hiring a car and doing Sacramento, Yosemite, Santa Barbara, some other places, then back to LA, driving down the Coast Road, and then another week here, and then we fly home in April 11th.
Right. Okay. Well, just remember they drive on the other side of the road.
It's all right. Sue will be driving.
Right. So we're going to go to Karen Pfeiffer, who's got a famous sister, she tells me.
Yes,
And you-
indeed. My older sister, of course. Yes, thank you. Oh, first of all, wonderful stories all around, and how very interesting to learn about your country, and lovely stories earlier. So fabulous. Well, here the little one is my cat. She's just come in the right moment because I think she loves the next story. And I thought it was nice, Keith, that in your story was an eagle as well, because mine features an eagle as well, although it's not a Christian story. But it starts all with it was a day, just a beautiful sunny day, just like today, really, maybe a little bit warmer, a little bit later in the year, when a little sparrow was sitting in a garden hedge on top of the highest twig, and he was spreading out his little wings and enjoying himself because he was warmed by the sun and enjoying every moment of the time he was sitting there. And he was looking around, and suddenly a ladybird was flying in front of his beak, and he was trying to catch it, but he was too fast, he couldn't get him. And he thought, oh, it doesn't matter, I'll find something else to eat. It was so jolly on that day because it was just wonderful. The flowers had just started to bring all the beautiful colors out, and the lawn was lush, and everything had sprung on this wonderful, warm, late spring day. The little sparrow was flying in his all enjoyment, up and down and bouncing and twirling around and going around the birch tree and over the hedge and around the hedge and through the strawberries, and landed by a little puddle. Because it had been raining quite a lot in the last few weeks and months, and although most of it had dried up, it left behind this little puddle, and the sparrow thought, oh, that's beautiful, I'm going to have a bath. So he's jumped into the puddle, spreading his wings with the water splashing it about. And it was so excited about it that little drops were all over the puddle, and they created a little rainbow in the sunshine. Red and yellow and pink and green, orange and purple and blue. I can sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow too. Oh, and the sparrow was happy because it was such a joyful moment and day. And whilst he was enjoying himself in the puddle, he looked up, and on the tree, on the top, on the highest branches, he saw two birds. So he flew up to them and just sat down on a branch underneath them, looked up and said, oh, brother eagle, sister dove, what are you doing here on a fine day like this? Shouldn't we fly? We're birds. We've got the ability to fly and enjoy the moment. Come on, let's fly, let's fly. And the dove looked at the eagle, and the eagle looked at the dove, and they both were looking down at the sparrow, and the dove said, oh, why would I fly today? Yesterday, the day was much finer. It was much warmer. The colors seemed to have shown much, much nicer than they do today. And I was flying all over the land, across the farmers' fields. It was all like emerald green, and it was so beautiful. I've never seen anything like it before. The sky was blue, you couldn't imagine it. So why would I fly today when yesterday I had the most perfect flight? Yesterday, said the eagle, yesterday is nothing. Tomorrow, I'm going to have the flight of my life. I will be flying further, faster, and higher than any bird has ever flown before. I will be flying past the rainbow, through the clouds, past the woman in the moon, and it will be the flight of my life. So why would I fly today if tomorrow I'm gonna have the flight of my life? And the eagle looked at the dove, and the dove looked at the eagle, and they both looked down to the sparrow. But where a minute ago the sparrow had sat, there was only an empty branch. And if you looked very closely, you would have seen over a little puddle in the garden over there, there's a little rainbow. Red and yellow and pink and green, orange and purple and blue.
Oh, lovely, Karen.
you.
Absolutely lovely.
I'm sorry, folks, but I have to go.
No, you go. So it's lovely to see you here, Donald, and have a.
All right,
We all
Donald.
hope we all hope you have a wonderful holiday, and I expect a
Thank you very
postcard.
much. Thank you very much. Hopefully catch you
Okay,
the next.
Donald,
Bye.
you be away,
Bye.
mate. Okay. Right, so we have Rona, and then I've got a St. Cuthbert story that I think I'm going to tell tonight. So, okay. So, Rona, we'll go to you, and then I'll finish up.
Thank you. That was a lovely story, Karen. Very sweet. Okay, well, I'm going to tell you the story of the warrior because I think it's very relevant today. The war had been going on for years, possibly even centuries. And this particular battle had been raging for many years, something like 7 years. And this particular battle actually had been going for 11 days, but they'd had no food for the last 3 days. They were separated, the two factions were separated by a stream, and that stream wasn't particularly wide, nor was it particularly deep. It was about 2 feet deep. And the surrounds were just, you could tell there had been a mighty war fought there. And one young soldier woke up and realised that all his comrades around about him were dead. And he thought, is it over? And he looked across the stream where the other soldiers were. And he saw no signs of life. And he thought, I'm going home. This war is over. And I've won. We are the victors. And then all of a sudden there was movement on the other side. And he called across, who's there? And this younger soldier stood up. And the first soldier said to him, are you the only one? And he said, yes, I think so. And it turned out that they were the only two. So the older one, who was about 28, said to the younger soldier, who was only about 20 years old, we will fight the final battle and one of us will go home. One of us will be the victor. But before we do that, we should rest. We should sleep till dawn. And when the sun rises, we will have our battle. Even as he's saying that, he's thinking to himself, well, that's not a very bright idea. If I fall asleep, that young soldier might come across and cut my throat. And the young soldier said to himself, if he thinks I'm going to lie down and fall asleep, so he can cut my throat, he can think again. So the older soldier started to speak to the younger one and told him all about himself. He says, I married the most beautiful girl in my village, but I didn't know I was going to get her mother as well, and her mother is a nightmare. I joined up to get away. And the younger soldier said, I married the most beautiful girl in my village, but it wasn't her mother that was the problem, it was her father. Everything I'd done, he had done it better. He had done it bigger. He had done it more times. He was just always on to me about how I should be doing things. So I was glad to get away too. But I miss my little brothers. And the first soldier said, I miss my son. I've got a son, Alexander, who's 6 years old. I can't wait to see him again. I've made him a wooden sword, and he actually had it in his belt, and he took it out and showed it to the young soldier. He spoke all night. And the older soldier, when he realised this young man looked exactly like him, olive skin, brown eyes, jet black hair. They even wore very similar uniforms, tabards, leather tabards over the skirt, sandals up the legs. He said, why am I killing him? I don't even know what this war's about. Nobody that's alive today has any idea why we're fighting. It started so long ago. I'm going to end it. I'm going to end it here and now. And he said to the young soldier, when we've completed this battle, the war will be over forever. And as he was speaking, he walked towards the stream and he took off his helmet and he removed his tabard and he bent down to drink. And when he saw himself, his reflection in the water, he couldn't believe it. He was like a monster. He was covered in thick mud and blood and gore. But he washed his hands in the clear water coming from downstream and drank like this, but watching his enemy all the while. The young soldier copied him, took off his helmet and his tabard, threw down his shield and his sword, and he dived head first into the water and submerged his head. For a moment, the older soldier thought, I could kill him now and it would be all over. But that would be murder, and you couldn't do it. Instead, when the young soldier stood up again, the older soldier took his sword and he threw it as far as he could downstream. And he said, this war is over now. None of us has to die. We will go back and say that we have made peace and this war is over. And the younger soldier was delighted and he threw his sword away. And if that has happened, if they had both gone home and told the same story, that might well have been the end of that war. But the young soldier could not resist the temptation to say that he had killed the last man standing and that they had won. And of course, word filtered through, and eventually the war started up all over again, because the older soldier said, no way did he win this war. And it started again. And when I told that to a group of young students a couple of years ago who were in a PRU unit, these kids had been chucked out of mainstream school because of their behaviour. Nobody could get through to these boys, but I used to go in and tell them stories and they were like little babes in arms. They just sat there, you know, hanging on to every word. And when I told that story, one of these boys who was particularly bright looked at me directly, but before he got a chance to speak, the mentor in the room said to him, "Hold on a minute, boys. I think that deserves a round of applause." And that young man, who turned out to be one of the brightest kids I've ever met, and he's in this PRU unit, turned to his mentor and he said, "Sir, we're contemplating." Now, I don't know who was the most shocked, me or the mentor, but this boy was very bright. And then he said to me, "Miss, that's the war in the Middle East, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, son, it is. And it's still going on to this day." And you know what he said to me? "It won't stop until we all agree that it should."
Well, I think we could, we'd all agree that it won't stop until all agree that it should. And I would be the first one to say it should stop now.
Me too.
I really would say that, yeah. So I'm going to tell a story now that I thought it came from Keith, Lincolnshire Keith, but it doesn't actually, because it follows on, Rona, from the one that you've just told. And it starts like this. For long ago, there were kingdoms all over England and Wales, and there was Northumberland and Wessex and Mercia and Paris and all the others. And there was a chap, a monk called Cuthbert. Now, he wasn't a saint in those days, he was just a bishop. But the Northumberlands decided to come down and talk to the Mercians, and they brought an army with them. And they got as far as the River Severn between Shrewsbury and Much Wenlock, in a village that we now call Cressidge. it comes from the words Christ's Oak, because it was named Christ's Oak on the day that the two kings met. For the Northumberlands came down, for they were Christians, but the Mercians in them days, they were ruled by Penda. And Penda, he took his religion from the old Norse religions. People would call him a pagan now, but it's not quite the same name. But they followed the old gods that they brought on the boats as they came, because the gods had come on the boats with the people that sailed the seas. And they created Mercia. And they met either side of the river. And the two kings looked eye to eye each other, and they looked across, and both armies were there and everything else. And Cuthbert came up between them. And he started preaching the Bible as he would, but he knew every word of the Bible, they say. And he started taking extracts from it, and he said, we're Christians. And if you were Christian as well, you and us, we wouldn't have anything to fight over. So why don't you change your religion? Well, asking a person to change their religion is a big thing. And Penda turned round and went, we'll stay with our gods, for our gods look after us. But we have no Christians here in Mercia. But the difference between you and I is if there were Christians here, I wouldn't mind too much, as long as they swore loyalty to their king on this earth. As long as they're loyal to me, I don't particularly mind which religion they're. And the Northumberland king, he looked back, and he was Oswald, and he looked back and he said, well, no, they've got to be Christian, they've got to be loyal, and everybody's got to be loyal to me. But Cuthbert looked at Oswald and said, yes, but in your lands, Oswald, there are pagans. There are people that I have to go and convert to Christianity. Penda's right. As long as you're loyal to the king, shouldn't matter which god you pray to. And Oswald looked at him, and he was absolutely staggered. And he said, I'll show you, he said. This is how it works. And he picked up Oswald's war axe, and he threw it across the river, and he made a hole in the river, in the ground. And he said, put an acorn there. Where the divot is landed, the axe is landed, there's a hole in the ground. Take the axe out, put an acorn there, and the acorn will grow into a fine oak tree. And every time you see that oak tree, you'll know that Christians are in your land, as you said before, Cuthbert, but we can live in peace, because this will be Christ's Oak, we will call it. And Penda, he agreed to that. He said, yes, he said, I'll plant the tree there, and the tree can grow. But I'm going to give you something back for you to take back to Northumberland, so you know wherever you are, people of my religion are with you. And Cuthbert and Oswald looked at him and said, go on then, what are we going to take back all the way to Northumberland? And Penda said this. He looked up and he looked round at the Wrekin, he looked in the river, and he looked all around. He said the first day of the week is called Sunday. And the second day of the week is called Moon Day. And the third day of the week is called Tua's Day. And Tua, it's not death. Some people call it death, but it's not death. Tua's, his job was to finish something and to start something else. So at every finishing, there's a starting. And every death, that means there's a new life. And as winter comes and the spring comes and everything else, it is not just to say that Tua means death is wrong. Tua means to finish, so a start can start again. And there's Woden's Day, the biggest of all our gods. And there's Thor, his son, and Freya, his daughter. And there's Saturs. Saturs was the blacksmith to the gods. He was the one that made their swords, and he was the one that made their shoes for their horses and made all their metalwork. And he was so well respected and so good at what he did that they named a day after him, Saturs. So he said, Penda, looking at Oswald, when you go back north, you'll always know that the days of the week are named after my gods and not your gods. And I will keep the tree here, and that tree can grow here for as long as it takes, for so everybody will know there's a Christian in my lands in Mercia. Now, the village that grew up around that tree is called Cressidge, and it's about 5 miles from Much Wenlock and about 5 miles from Shrewsbury. And Despina, if you're interested, I'll take you there next time you visit, and I'll show you the tree that's still there to this day. And they reckon it's the third one. And there's an old oak tree. Well, it's not an old oak tree, it's about 100 years old now. And there's a very, very old tree, and it's just leaning up against the old tree to the new tree. And it just looks as if the old tree is turning into the new tree. And they reckon that that's probably the new one now, in the 21st century from those days, is probably only the third one that's been there. It may be the fourth one. They don't really know because no one can. But an oak tree would last 800 or 900 years before it dies. And then the new one's got to grow up and the old one's got to grow into it. So it could be the third, it might be the fourth, but it's still there to this day. And the village is definitely there to this day. There's Christians all over here. Milberger was one of the first ones that came to Much Wenlock, and there's pagans here now. That tree's still there, and the names of the weeks are still in our language, still called those days. And that was to do with